Hello, everybody. We're going to take a couple minutes here just to get some more people on, if that's possible. I know that this was very, very quick trying to put this together. I didn't give people a lot of heads up and a little feedback there. Didn't have a lot of time to get this put together and give you guys a lot of warning on this one, a heads up. So just going to wait for a couple seconds, and then I basically just want to get this out there this week. Just so people can start making some decisions. I don't want to belabor this, but if anybody has any questions, please, switchers is a big topic. I have a presentation to go through here. I've got about 45 minutes today, but please ask your questions and I'll try and get back to you as quickly as I can on the chat, or I will respond to you as I can. So we're going to talk today about video switchers and the three basic topics. The first topic on video switchers is just a basic system setup. Where does a switcher fit? Why do we need a switcher? The second and third are switcher features, and then some switcher options. And that's what we'll spend a lot of time on today, is just going through here's some different switchers, cost ranges, what they do, what they don't do. So in a basic system setup, and let me make just full screen for you here. In a basic system setup, we have our cameras over here on the left. Do we see they're coming in? This one's coming in SDI. Here's maybe a PTZ camera coming in SDI. Your controller for your PTZ. Pro Presenter laptop, that's maybe going directly into a switcher, or it's going through a scaler into a switcher, and we'll talk about scaling and frame syncs in a little bit. The switcher takes all of your inputs and then mixes them together to an output, which is going out to maybe an encoder, maybe it's going out to projection in your room, maybe it's going to a recording of some type. So I'd like to take a look at just some considerations and things that you should probably be thinking of. And the first one here is scalers. So what scalers do is, let's just say for some reason you have an older format, maybe it's an old DVD player or something, and it's a 480 resolution. And you need to get that to be 1080 or 720 for your switcher. So you may put a scaler in there to be able to enlarge or shrink that source to get it into the switcher. Now, another thing with switchers outside of scalers are what are called frame synchronizers. And frame synchronizers will take your video and make sure it's in sync with everything else. So in a bigger switcher situation, we have something called Genlock or black burst. It's a signal that goes through the switcher and goes to all the cameras, keeps everything in sync. If you don't have that, and a switcher requires it, it may just have a black signal and you won't see your video coming in. So you'd have a frame synchronizer on there and it would fix that problem, put your signal into sync. So you may need frame synchronizers. A lot of the switchers we're talking about today don't need those. So we talked about a scaler really quick about the size, but scalers can also change the frame rate. So for instance, a computer coming in may be 1920 by 1080, but it might be 60 hertz or 60 frames instead of 59.94. And some switchers don't have a lot of tolerance, and they'll say, I have to be at 5994 or everything has to match exactly. So scalers can come in there. And that's what you see down here on the bottom left is a universal scaler. We like the Data Video DAC 70 because it takes in VGA, HDMI, SDI, pumps those all back out at the resolution you need for your switcher. Another consideration is the length of cable runs. If you're going to be running more than 15 feet or something, you're probably not going to be using HDMI. It's smarter, I think, to convert to SDI. You could do HDMI over some Cat5 type of situation. The other thing we're always looking for in these setups is, what is our latency? How many conversions does that signal have to make before we get to our switcher? So the more conversions you have to make, the slower that camera could be. If you're streaming, probably not a big deal. But if you're going to be going to screens in the room, you're going to want to make sure that you have everything gen-locked if you can, frame synchronized if you can, have as much, minimize the delay as much as possible. Another consideration is the number of distinct outputs. When I say distinct outputs, I mean that a program, what we call our main output from what we're switching, is one output. Maybe another output is preview. Maybe there's a program clean, so that we can send out record our video that doesn't have any text on top of it. For instance, for posterity, when I think about big events we don't necessarily want the only recording to be the one that has all the lyrics on top of the band. We want a clean recording that has just the band with no lyrics. Another main one is just an aux bus, that you can take any input and send it to an aux bus. And then the third would be, or not third, fourth or fifth would be MEs. So multiple switches out. And we'll talk about that here later. But the aux bus, I like to say, a lot of folks want to say, I want to take my Pro Presenter signal and that goes to my screens. And then my switching goes to the atrium, goes to a recording, goes out to the streaming services. So we might take Pro Presenter coming in on input 4 and put that out an aux bus directly to the screens. And then maybe if we have to switch the screens, we can, but primarily we're just routing that through the switcher on a bus. The other thing, consideration, do you have multi-viewers? What kind of multi-viewer layouts can you do? That's a setup where on your screen, you see all of the cameras coming in and all of your outputs and things. There are some switchers that don't have those. And then the director doesn't necessarily know what each camera is seeing. He doesn't know how to make a good decision. And you saw some multi-viewers in our video directing webinar, if you saw that. But some of these don't have multi-viewers. And if you say, well, I could add a multi-viewer, but then you have to think about cabling. Does your multi-viewer, whatever process that is, do you have to split your signals to send one to the multi-viewer, one to the switcher? Or can you loop through your multi-viewer to the switcher? So those are some things to consider. And then matrix routers. And I don't have that in this diagram, but what a matrix router basically does, and Blackmagic has a lot of these and a lot of companies do, but you take all of you convert everything to SDI, which is what I typically do. Then in this router, let's just say it's a 20 by 20, everything that has an output gets plugged into the input side of the router, and everything that has an input is on the output side of the router. And in the router, it's like a big patch bay where you can take this camera is coming into the router and I want it to go to input 1 of the switcher. The advantage of this is that camera could go multiple places. I could just make a hard switch and say, I want just that camera to go to that screen and avoid any switchers or anything. I want just that camera to go to our display system out in the lobby, avoid everything else. Or what if the switcher takes a total dump? You could say, I want the Pro Presenter input to go directly to the screens and directly to the streaming encoder. So it's a nice piece to have because it does distribution amplification. So one in can go to many outs. It also keeps everything in one spot, so we can make routing changes without having to go and recable a bunch of stuff. So that's something to consider. Okay, next piece is here. We're going to get into different video switchers and features. So when we're looking at switcher features, we want to say, what are the inputs and outputs? Are they SDI? Are they HDMI? Is there something with NDI, which we discussed in an earlier presentation? And how many of them do we have? Okay, I want to know how many input switcher, and that's a lot of times when you're looking at a switcher, count up how many possible sources are you going to have, and think about everything. Think about your computers, your main computer, another presenter's computer, your 2 or 3 cameras. Is there going to be like some type of a DVD player or something that you need to consider? So those are some considerations on your input and outputs. And then what are the formats, SDI, HDMI? How many keyers or picture-in-picture do you have? So a keyer is where we're going to take a video signal and knock out the green or knock out the alpha and be able to put text on top of the rest of our video mix. So we want to know if we have keyers, and do we have picture-in-picture, and how many of those do we have? I talked earlier about scalers and frame synchronizers. How many are in the switcher? Is there a scaler on every input or only on some inputs? Blackmagic is notorious for not having scalers built in to their switcher. So you can plug in a camera and plug in another camera, and if their frame rate is off by a little bit, it just doesn't work. So you have to add some other hardware to get everything up to the same frame rate. How many aux buses do you have? A lot of the switchers I'm going to show you today have at least one aux bus, but some have more or multiple assignable outputs. That's something to consider. Also, what are the audio capabilities? We typically think of a video switcher as it switches video, but now that we're streaming, we need to get that video signal and that audio signal merged together somehow. And a lot of video switchers will do that to some capacity. And I'll show you some of those. And then how many mix engines do we have? So an ME or mix engine is when we have a program and a preview bus. Okay, then you can have multiples of those. And I could say, let's say I want a composition where I have a background, and then I have a picture-in-picture down here where I'm switching between cameras, and I have another picture-in-picture up here where I'm switching between different computer sources. We might be using 3 MEs, a main program one that has that background layer and has 2 keys on it. And then each key is another ME where I can switch different things inside there. So if you want to get really creative and have a lot of layers and things, You can think of MEs as another layer that I can switch. Okay. So how many mix engines do you have? And then the last one is a remote control, GPIO, tally support. How are you going to be able to control this in other ways? Can you control, have tallies on the switcher at all? Are they preview and program tallies, or what kind of tally are they? And then can I control this from an iPad? Can I control it from Stream Deck? Can I control it from another type of integration controller that I have in my room? Those are some things to consider. There's also software and hardware switchers. So a hardware switch is just what it says. It's made of hardware. Software is something that you're running on a computer. So you can download that like vMix. Typically, hardware switchers are going to be a little bit faster in being able to process video, and software switchers are going to have more latency. Software switchers have a lot of capability for going to streaming and recording, but they may not be used as well in a live situation. So if I was going to use one of those and I had to have an aux bus go to my screen, but I wasn't going to do a lot of image magnification on the screen, then a software switcher might work really well. Okay, so let's take a look. And right now, I'm just going to cruise through a bunch of different switchers and talk about their feature sets. So this is a small switcher by Roland, and we like the Roland switchers. The V1 HD or the V1 SDI. The big difference there is one is HDMI and one is SDI. So they each have 4 inputs. They each have a downstream key. They have RCA audio in. They have RCS, which is the remote control software, which is you connect to it USB, and you can see a lot more things about your switcher on your computer that maybe you can't access very well from the dials. And then outputs, they have one program output, a preview output, and a multi-view. And you can see down here, the one version is an HDMI only version. This other one is SDI, and it has 2 fully just SDI. Number 3 is shared SDI or HDMI with the scaler. And then number 4 is HDMI only. So that's the Roland piece, the smaller one there. 1,000 for the HD and 1,500 for the SDI. This next one is the one I'm actually using right now on my computer. And this is kind of nice. It's $1,200, has 3 inputs, and one of those inputs loops out. So one of the HDMIs loops out because if you're doing, it's made for like gaming and podcasting, but basically there's no latency through that loop. You plug into 3 and you go right out of 3. And there's no time delay. So let's say it's for gamers and they want to be able to play their game in real time and they don't want to have any latency. It does have one keyer. It has XLR ins and RCA ins. It has an RCS software to control audio levels and other video functions. And then it has one program out, one monitor output, which is not a multi-view. It's just a monitor out. It has the through. And then the nice thing about this VR series by Roland, anything that says VR means it also has USB out. So I'm just going USB out of the switcher directly into my computer that I'm going into my broadcast here. It also has some other features, like it has background music button. So if you're trying to do like a single guy thing, it has, applause. Has a reverb channel. It's really made for a one-man show. So we've seen this in some churches where they just have one camera and one video source, and they know that the camera is going to be always aligned, so they don't need a multi-viewer. Or we're using this right now with our pastor, that he can sit in front of a table, have his PowerPoint on the machine or on the table plugged in here, a microphone like this plugged in here, a camera on him, and he does a Bible study, and he can do all of his own switching, and that goes right to a recorder or right out to a stream. So nice little switcher there. Next one here, this is a little bit bigger Roland, the V60. It's $3,000 roughly. Has 4 SDI ins, 2 HDMI ins, a VGA in. It also has an aux bus, a downstream key. It has 2 still stores, which are really nice. So those are, if I have some graphics that I want to be able to stay or be able to punch up anytime I want, I can load those into this switcher. And what I like about in this switcher is they stay. So maybe it's just a main title graphic for your church. Those, whenever you boot up the switcher, they're in there. Okay. Has RCA and XLR ins, and it also has an auto mixer. So this is a great little switcher. If you have a Bible study room where you want to have 4 presenters up there, and as they talk, it's doing the audio mixing and auto mixing them. So you don't need to have another soundboard. Works great for that. The audio inputs will also handle any microphone inputs or inputs from your soundboard, and it will handle any audio sources coming in from a computer in on the HDMI or SDI. It does have control software. It can be controlled with RS-232. It has tally, preview, and program. It can also be connected via IP. So for tallies and control, it can be IP. It has 2 SDI outputs, 2 HDMI outputs. So it means it has an aux bus, and it has a multi-viewer. And on this particular switcher, like a lot of them, we have a preview row on the bottom and a program row on the top. And then we can see our aux bus right here, which is really handy if we want to switch things to the screen. Really easy. I don't have to dive into software to be able to do that. So that's a really nice feature, this switcher. One thing I did not like about this switcher is in the picture-in-picture mode. If I have a picture-in-picture of like my Pro Presenter, I can no longer dissolve between cameras underneath. In this instance, it makes this your picture-in-picture bus and this your background. So that's something that's just a little bit weird on the switcher. Otherwise, I like this one a lot. We use this in our church, and we have a lot of other churches that are using this switcher. So it's pretty nice. This is probably one of my favorites in the small switchers. It's a little low on inputs and outputs, but $6,500, the Roland VR50 Mark II. 4 SDI inputs, 4 HDMI inputs. So they're mix and match. Basically, you have 4 inputs. They can either be SDI or HDMI. 2 of those could also be VGA, so they're shared. Does have an aux bus, and it has the buttons here to select your aux. It does have a downstream key, and it has 4 still stores. In this one, they are not stored to the machine. So every time you boot the machine, you have to load in the still stores again. Has XLR and RCA inputs and an auto mixer. And what I love about this one is I have basically a soundboard built in, so I can mix all my external sources and my internal sources, like my HDMIs and SDIs. Okay. Then over here on your buttons, what's a little bit different on this switcher is you don't have a preview row. You just have a program, and but you can set up whether you want it to dissolve or not. Does have picture-in-picture. I'm going to lose my train of thought here. But the one thing I love about this switcher is your multi-view is built right in here, and that's a touch screen. So I can see all of my sources, and I can just touch the video that I want to have go live, and it goes live. Very nice if you don't have a lot of room, just a throw down switcher. So, and it's a VR series, so it has USB out going directly to streaming. So very nice. Okay. Now we're going to look at some data video switchers. This was a switcher we had out really early in the COVID crisis because it's very affordable. $1,750, has 2 SDI, 2 HDMI. It doesn't do 1080p, which is something just to know about this one. It does have an aux bus, has a downstream keyer, has a still. It has audio in. It can do tally. And then it has 1 SDI out and 2 HDMI outs, one being used for a multi-view. So very affordable switcher to get a little bit of audio mixing in, coming in from your board, or if you just have a few mics. Really nice, very affordable. A bigger brother to this one is going to be the 3200 or 3220 here. And this one's $5,500, much around the same price point as the VR50 from Panasonic. One thing I love about the VR50 from Panasonic, lots of scalers. So I can manipulate my video image coming in. I can crop it. I can resize it. Very, very handy. This data video has 8 SDI ins and 4 HDMI ins. So a lot of IO. It has 4 upstream keyers and 2 downstream keyers for putting text on the screen. If you want to build a picture in pictures, it has 8 picture in pictures, logos, virtual backgrounds, a clip player, CG software. It can do 999 still stores. It has XLR audio, tally, control. The outputs, it has 6 SDIs and 3 HDMIs. So all those 6 SDIs can be assignable. So they could be a clean feed. They could be a program. They could be an aux. They could be preview. So very capable switcher. And one thing I like about this, has a card frame here. I shouldn't say a card frame, but this is basically the processing unit. And this sits in your rack. And then this piece just connects with one cable back here. So you don't have all of your inputs and outputs coming in on the desk. So it makes for a really clean surface. Down here on the bottom, you can see some of the IO, but this is a great switcher. A lot of inputs and outputs for $5,500. So very affordable. I think this would be a nice switcher for just about anyone to have. This is another version of that same switcher. This is the HS version, which is basically kind of a suitcase box. It's $7,750. But basically, you flip this open, your multi-viewer is right there. All the I/O is on the back. Great for a compact space. Great if it's something you need to move around your building, or even if you're like a school or something, take out and put on a sports field or whatever. So just another option of that same switcher. I'm going to talk really quickly about Blackmagic switchers. I don't tend to use Blackmagic a lot. We have some of their stuff. We've had some switchers work very well. We've had some switchers just die on us randomly. We've had a lot of firmware issues with switchers where today it works and you update the software and now it doesn't, and you spend half a day trying to fix it. I know there are a lot of Blackmagic switchers out there, especially in the church market, because they seem to do everything and seem to be very affordable. So as you can see here, their price range goes from $300, $600, $1,000, $2,300, $3,000, $4,000. So not expensive for their switchers. And the $4,000 is actually their 2 ME switchers. So it has 2 of those mix buses. But then you have to buy a very expensive, like over $10,000 Surface to be able to control all of it. But they have multiple I/O options, very affordable, not a lot of scalers. This is the one where I think they're getting better on this. But you kind of have to get everything to the right frame rate, right size before it goes to the Blackmagic. It doesn't like to play nice with a bunch of different formats. So, and then reliability is something I'm always concerned about with Blackmagic. They tend to die at the wrong time. The new ones also, they have some heat issues. They have very loud fans. So I'm not saying I hate on it because it is very affordable and very capable. It's just something that whenever I do a Blackmagic switcher, I just kind of cross my fingers and say, I hope this keeps working for a long time. So something to consider. We're going to take a look here. This is the Ross Carbonite Solo Black. So now the other 2 companies were for kind of like Roland is in, corporate production type and in house of worship. Blackmagic does some bigger stuff. Now we're getting into Ross, and Ross is a company that does broadcast switchers. So some of the bigger studios and stadiums and sports facilities and news organizations are going to be using Ross as one of their options. So Ross Carbonite Black Solo is their kind of mini switcher, entry line switcher with a lot of the capability of their bigger switchers. So it's $6,000 for this one, $7,000 for a larger input version, 6 SDI, 3 HDMI. They have 2 mini me's, which is kind of hard to wrap your head around a mini me, but they almost have more MEs built in that you can do in your picture-in-picture that you couldn't do with some of the other switchers we've seen. Has a chroma keyer, has downstream keys, it has macros, so you can have a little piece of software that runs with this, and you can hit a macro and have it do a whole bunch of different controls. DVEs, so if we need to do video effects. Expression CG is a CG that comes with this, and that's a light version of their very powerful character generator software. This one comes in 2 formats. One is this version where all of the I/O is on the back of the switcher. They also have a version like that data video where you have a control surface and then a rack frame that has all of the I/O on it, which I would prefer, but it is more money. The price doesn't quite double, but it goes up a few $1,000s here. So that's something to consider. Okay, now we're going to get into some of the software, just a couple software switchers. So the first one I want to talk about is vMix. It's $700 for the software, which is, they have a lot of versions, but that's the one I'd recommend. Has a lot of channels, and I don't want to go into every feature on vMix, but it can do NDI. This is the first of the ones we've seen here that can do NDI, which we talked about in a previous webinar, which is a network interface for getting cameras in. It's great for recording and streaming. It has interactivity with social networks. Just a ton of features in there. You can add some hardware options, like basically you take a computer, so $700 is just the software, then you'd maybe buy a $3,000 beefed up computer, okay? And you can add, Skarhoj has some really nice, I actually spelled that wrong, Skaarhoj. Skarhoj has a lot of nice controllers that you can use to switch this video. The concern I have here is you're responsible for building the hardware and putting the hardware, all your inputs and outputs in. So that's kind of on you. And then latency. It does have more latency than a hardware controller. So if you're using this to switch your cameras in the room, just understand there'll be some delay from when the pastor's mouth moves or his hand moves to when it hits the screen. So that's something to consider. The next one I want to talk about here is the NewTek TriCaster. This is a software hardware combo. You buy a computer that has their software running on it, has some of their own hardware. They have versions going from $6,000 up through $40,000. Very heavily into NDI. So they have either SDI inputs or it can also take a lot of NDI. We've been using their lineup of switchers for 20 years. The switcher we have can handle 44 inputs, and it has 8 downstream keys, and so it has multiple MEs there. It also has DDRs, which are digital disc recorders or playbacks. So if I have a bunch of videos I want to roll in or lower thirds, I can roll those in and I could play an hour-long video right out of here. So as soon as I hit the button to go to it, it starts playing. When it's done, it goes back to my cameras. It also can do virtual sets, much like the data video. So that's where I'm on a green screen and I have a different set behind me, and I can actually zoom in and out and it will adjust the set behind me. So that's the nice piece with virtual sets on TriCaster. It's great for streaming and recording. There is some latency. I'm going to go back here. There is some latency in this switcher, typically about 2 frames. We've used this for very large events. We use it for image magnification. What you'll have to look into for the TriCaster is on the different configurations. Is it HDMI? Is it SDI? They also have 4K versions, which is something to consider. So another possible switcher, if you see a lot of the, just to be honest, a lot of the bigger web broadcasts are probably using a TriCaster or vMix. They're not buying a lot of hardware because they're not concerned about latency. They're concerned about a lot of capability, and the software switchers allow us to do that. So vMix and TriCaster would be great for that. We use vMix, for instance, for our instant replay. That's just an instant replay box. So that's something to consider. I'm sorry if this was really quick. I've been getting a lot of questions of the same questions over and over, and which switcher should we use? So I kind of wanted to talk about some switcher options. What are the benefits of them? What are the downsides? What are the price points? So I hope you got something out of that. I didn't see a lot of questions today, but please feel free to go over to churchnext.online, ask us questions there, or ask us on our Facebook group. As always, let me pull up my banner here. If you need to get a hold of me, you can contact me, phil@inspirmedia.com. Send me an email, and I'd be happy to help whenever I can. Next week on Church Next, we're going to have Leah on Wednesday, and then we'll just connect with you guys as soon as we possible on more webinars. Let us know if you have any questions. Take care, everybody.